Hello, history nerds and historians. My name's Krystina, and this is Effed Up History. This is where we talk about a little tidbit from history that's super fucked up. Now, the concept of history that is fucked up is subjective. So sometimes we're going to talk about a funny tidbit, like a lot of the mythology that we cover, such as the wedding of Freya, because ancient beliefs and myths are a part of history, even though some people like to negate that. Sometimes it can be society or an event that's fucked up, like when we talked about the Connecticut witch trials. And sometimes it's really, really fucked up that an amazing person from history is treated terribly or just forgotten about altogether. So today we're going to talk about one of the last ones. But before I reveal who we're going to talk about, let's talk about how I got here and how I picked this person. So in the United States, the month of May honors two different ethnic groups. It is Jewish American Heritage Month, and it's also Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. So with this in mind, I just started Googling notable people in Asian or Asian American history, and then also like notable people in Jewish history. And while I was doing this, I found a Chinese man who was born in China, but spent the later half of his life in America, in San Francisco, California, who has ties to the Jewish population. And I found him and was like, this is a fucking gold mine. This is who I'm going to talk about. He has to be a really cool person. And friends, this man is amazing. So today I am honored to tell the story of Ho Feng Shan, who some people call the Chinese Schindler. This wonderful man saved thousands of Jewish lives in the years leading up to World War II in Austria. So I'm going to address two things before we start. If you want to research this man, sometimes his name is written Ho Feng Shan, and other times it's written Feng Shan Ho. I think that that's just a difference between like the Eastern and Western ways of saying and writing names. From my understanding, a lot of Asian cultures will use the surname first, followed by their given name, and then Western cultures do the reverse. So I'll be doing the Eastern order when I use his full name, because that's how he was talked about during this time, and that's how his name was written during this time. But he also, because he emigrated to the Americas, the other way is acceptable as well. So sometimes you'll see it written either way. I'm going to say Ho Feng Shan. Also, number 2, I can barely speak English most days, in case you haven't noticed. And there are some very difficult words in this, and I am apologizing now for my complete butchering of the Chinese Mandarin and German language, because I speak neither. So, without further wordiness, sit back, relax, and practice your oh good god, what the fuck faces. Ho Feng Shan was born September 10th, 1901 in rural Yiyang in the Hunan province. Ho Feng Shan translates to Phoenix on the Mountain. He was born into a poor family. His father was Ho Yan Huai. I don't know what his mother's name was. I couldn't find it anywhere in my research, really. And I also know that he has siblings, or at least has one sister, and I don't know what her name is either, or if he had any more or anything like that. Literally just talks about his father. Now, when Ho Feng Shan is 7 years old in 1908, his father dies. And because they are already a poor family, they seek out help from other people and organizations, and they find help in the Norwegian Lutheran mission in China. That's also where Ho Feng Shan is educated. In 1921, when he was 20 years old, he received a scholarship to one of China's most elite schools. It's called the Yali College, also known as the College of Yale in China. So during this time, he supported his mother and sister by teaching high school while he was learning. In school, he was the student body president the last 2 years of school. He was the secretary general of the YMCA, and he became fluent in English and German in addition to his native Mandarin. So in 1926, when he is 25 years old, he graduates and gets a job as a teacher in the Nanhua School of Law and Politics. So he teaches there for a year and then returns to his hometown in the Hunan province, and then later wins a fellowship to study at the University of Munich in Germany. And from there, in 1932, at the age of 31, he earns his PhD in political economics and graduates with the highest honor. The next year, he becomes a secretary to the governor in the Hunan province and begins traveling the world as a representative of the Chinese government. So one of the most notable places that he went to during this time was the Chicago World's Fair that celebrated the city's centennial and also highlighted technological innovations. So this was a really important event that happened because it was during the Great Depression. And during the Great Depression, nobody thought that times would ever improve. So by having this giant event that highlighted everything positive that's happened in the 100 years since Chicago was founded, and then showing all of these like exciting new technologies and exciting new things that were going to happen and things that you could look forward to, it was really a great morale booster. So pause on talking about Ho Feng Shan's life for a moment. Let's talk about things in a more global sense during this time. So around the time he graduates and begins working for the government is, of course, when the tides start ebbing towards what will turn into World War II. So in January of 1933, Adolf Hitler becomes the Chancellor of Germany. And then in March of 1933, the Dachau concentration camp opens. The next month, Germans begin boycotting Jewish businesses, and then in August of 1934, Hitler becomes the Führer. In 1935, the Nuremberg laws are passed, which are basically racial laws passed in Germany that say that Jewish people were essentially no longer citizens of Germany. So I mean, of course, more happened during this time. This is like a single sprinkle on the World War II cupcake, but it kind of like sets the context a little bit about where the story goes. So in 1935, the same year that the Nuremberg laws pass, Ho Feng Shan begins his work as a diplomat in Turkey. In 1937, at the age of 36, Ho Feng Shan is transferred to Vienna, Austria, which is where he later does some of the most selfless and wonderful work that a person can do. And then there's also where he becomes the Chinese consul general. So during this time in Austria, they closed the embassies and established consulates there instead, which reported to the embassies that were in Berlin, Germany. And then in March of 1938, Germany invades Austria, and the next day is annexed by Germany, and all the German anti-Jewish laws are now Austrian laws. So note about Austria during this time, it had the third largest Jewish community in Europe with over 180,000 Jewish people. So just like in Germany, the Jewish populations start being seriously attacked in Austria. German people are forbidden from being part of public activity and congregating. Over 100 Jewish leaders are arrested and sent to concentration camps. Their homes are looted by the Gestapo. Their belongings are confiscated along with their businesses and their bank accounts. Jewish teachers are fired. I mean, it's a terrible time to be a Jew in Austria, or just the better part of Europe. So Jews are starting to get arrested and sent to concentration camps. Now, when they're arrested, they're told that the only way that they can get out of it is if they have a visa from Austria to literally anywhere else in the world. And when they do emigrate from Vienna, Austria, the Jews lose everything and are forced to pay taxes and fees on their assets that were just confiscated from them. So the Jews begin going to every single consulate that they can to try and get the visas, and most consulates don't even want to get involved because they're trying to keep good relationship with the German government. The United States has filled its Austrian quota and later required monetary sponsorships to enter the country. The British consulate posted a sign that no visas would be issued at all. The French wouldn't even look at the applications, and the Swiss demanded a J stamp on their passports so that they could immediately deny them access, especially to anyone over the age of 16 and under the age of 60. In fact, during this time, there was a meeting in Evian, France, the week of July 6, 1938, where representatives from 32 countries met, including major players like England, France, and the United States. None of the 32 countries wanted to open their doors to the Jewish people. They didn't want to relax their immigration policies to allow unrestricted entrance or even just a greater entrance to this entire population of people who were being attacked with a goal of essentially eradication through forced immigration and work in concentration camps. But not Ho Feng Shan. As a Chinese consul general, he issued visas to pretty much anyone who asked for it. He said in his memoirs, since the annexation of Austria by Germany, the persecution of the Jews is tragic. Persecution, a daily occurrence. I did whatever could be done to help them. One method was to help them leave Greater Germany by issuing them visas for Shanghai, which the Germans allowed Jews to leave if they had such visas. So now something else that was happening during this time was the Sino-Japanese War, also known as the Chinese War of Resistance. This is when Japan invaded China in 1937. So things are not great on that Eurasian whole continent during this time. But the Japanese government wasn't restricting anyone from coming into China. So when Ho Feng Shan was signing off on these visas, it wasn't something that was necessary for the Jews to enter Shanghai, but they needed it to leave Germany. In September of 1938, the Jewish population is starting to spread word that the Chinese consulate is pretty lax with who they issue the visas to, and long lines start to form. So these long lines do bring attention to Ho and what it seems like he's doing. So he's told to stop. Don't issue any more visas to Jews. And in his memoir, he recalls that the Chinese ambassador to Germany, Chen Qi, said that since Hitler was against the Jews, the Chinese should also be against the Jews to keep good ties with Germany. So his supervisor called Ho Feng Shan and told him to stop issuing the visas. Dr. Ho responded that his orders were that they should be tolerant of the Jews, which angered Qi, who told him again to stop. Dr. Ho did not and kept issuing them, which led to an investigation on the notion that the consulate was selling illegal visas. But this didn't lead anywhere, of course, because Ho and his vice chancellor were not doing it illegally. Austrian Jews did not want to emigrate to China for the most part. They wanted to go to the United States because of the relief programs there. And then if not the United States, then to Britain or France or any more of those major players that we've been talking about. So Ho Feng Shan brought this up when the investigator was like, why would we illegally sell these when nobody actually wants them at the end of the day? So one account that I read from during this time was from a woman named Addie Lagstein Bloods. And she said that the line was so long that her brother didn't think he'd be able to actually get in to see the consul general. So he went home, grabbed an envelope, and wrote some Chinese characters on there that he found in an encyclopedia. Then went back to the consulate, claiming to the security guard that he had a special delivery for the consul general, and then jumped the line, pulled out his application, and got the visas. Another account that I read was about a man named Hans Kraus, who was 19 at the time. So the lines were so long, the Chinese consulate and the Gestapo were harassing and abusing the people waiting in line. So Kraus stood in line for days trying to get in, and one day while he was waiting in line, Ho Feng Shan's car drove by. So he literally yeeted his application into the open window, not knowing if it would be received or accepted or anything. He threw it and he prayed. And then received his visas a couple days later. It seemed like Ho Feng Shan was literally accepting any application that came into him, and actually receives a demerit from his supervisor Chen Qi for the amount of visas that he's issuing, but he keeps at it. On November 7th, 1938, the third secretary of the Parisian German embassy was killed by a young Jewish man named Herschel Grinspan. Because of this, Hitler was so enraged that he ordered that all the Jews be restricted to their homes until the police could investigate more. So this started the Kristallnacht, also known as the Night of Broken Glass. On November 9th, 1938 in Germany, and then on the 10th of November in Vienna, Nazis destroyed synagogues, Jewish cemeteries, Jewish homes, businesses, schools. 100 Jews were massacred, and around 30,000 Jewish men were sent to the concentration camps. Then, with all of this destruction that they caused, the Jews are then fined $28 million for the Nazis destroying their own property. And from this absolutely terrible event, we get my favorite story about Ho Feng Shan, the badass. And this is his personal account that he wrote in his memoirs. He says he was scheduled to go and see a Mr. Rosenberg, who was an executive of the Standard Oil Company to say goodbye, because Rosenberg and all of his family were Jewish and their lives, property, jobs, and everything were no longer safe. They wanted to go to the United States, but didn't get approved. So Dr. Ho issued them Chinese visas, and then they were leaving for Shanghai that very day. So they were actually set to leave the day that Hitler passed the order that Jews were not allowed to leave their homes. So Mr. Rosenberg called Ho Feng Shan that morning and told him that he didn't forget their meeting, but with everything being so dangerous for them, he didn't want to put Dr. Ho in danger as well. But Dr. Ho said, "I felt obstinate at the moment and felt that a planned meeting date should always be kept, so I went anyway." So when he gets to their house, Mrs. Rosenberg meets him at the door and told Dr. Ho that Mr. Rosenberg had already been taken away to be interrogated, but that because he was such a nice guy, she wasn't really worried too much about him. But Dr. Ho stayed and waited with her just in case, and then 2 officers came to the door and demanded to search the premises. Mrs. Rosenberg told them politely but firmly, "You've already searched me twice." And one of the officers was like, "Well, this is number 3, bitch." He didn't actually say that. And the whole time Dr. Ho was sitting in the living room, smoking a cigarette, quote, "wondering how I would deal with these 2 ruffians." So the 2 officers walk into the living room, see him, and ask who he is and demand to see his identification card. He says, "No, that's okay. Who are you?" And then demands to see his identification card first, which pisses off the officer. Ho says, "He canvassed me up and down. In the meantime, the other fellow, with his hat awry, eyed Ho malignantly, and without saying a word, pulled a revolver out of his pocket, pointed it at Dr. Ho, and they asked him, 'What kind of person are you?' Ho says, 'It's easy to identify me. I'm the Chinese guy standing here. Who are you?' And quote, using Hitler's style of pontification, the officer said loudly, 'Our leader has said you foreigners should not enjoy special privileges in Germany, and since these privileges have been abolished, you have no right to be so audacious.'" And Ho just stood there and stared at him at gunpoint and said nothing, and probably just kept smoking his fucking cigarette, like a badass. And the 2 officers left without conducting their search. And before they left, they asked Miss Rosenberg who this random Chinese dude was, and she tells them that's the Chinese consul general. And the officer exclaims, quote, "God damn it, why didn't you say so earlier?" and leaves, slamming the door behind him. So Mr. Rosenberg came back right after that and apologized for everything that happened, and they said their goodbyes, and the Rosenbergs went to Shanghai, and he later wrote a book told from their perspective, and thanked China's generosity and expressed the admiration for Ho, quote, "acting righteously in the face of a wrong." So I really wanted to read Rosenberg's side of it, but Ho doesn't mention his first name, so I had a really hard time finding the specific memoir. But I'm going to keep looking, and I'll share on social media or something if and when I do find who it is and what it has to say. Or if any of you know, please let me know, because that would cut down on my research time a lot. One account I read said that in December of 1938 and January of 1939, following the Kristallnacht, over 7,000 Jews flee to Switzerland, and a good chunk of them have Chinese visas. So this is where we're going to talk very quickly about a woman named Resha Sturbuck. Resha was a Jewish woman who rescued and smuggled Jews into Switzerland, and it's said that she rescued over 2,000 Jews and was forging Swiss visas for them, but later obtained Chinese visas. Dr. Ho literally issued hundreds of visas to help these people. He was like, "Oh, are you forging those?" No, don't do that. You can get in a lot of trouble. You can get in even more trouble if you do that. Here, just take these visas, and just signed hundreds of them and sent them to her. And Japan, despite the terrible and horrific things that they did during this time and during the war, decided that they wouldn't restrict the immigration of Jews and passed decrees that they wouldn't be discriminated against or attacked in any Japanese territories, which at this time did include China. During this time, 18,000 German, Austrian, and Polish Jews flee to Shanghai, where there are some relief organizations that are giving them money and food and clothing and housing. They live in what they called a ghetto. It was just a little Jewish neighborhood, and it wasn't great. but it also wasn't a concentration camp. So it was pretty fucking good. Spring of 1939, the Chinese consulate building is confiscated by the Nazis. So they claim it's because the owner was a Jewish man who lived in Switzerland, but I'm kind of skeptical of that. Because when Dr. Ho goes and asks for more funds to relocate, he's denied. So Ho Feng Shan pays for a facility out of his own pocket so that he can continue issuing his visas. In May of 1940, his time as the Chinese consul in Vienna ends, and his successor pretty much stops issuing visas to Jews altogether. And then in December of 1941, about a year and a half later, the Chinese consulate is closed completely. It's said that during the 2 years that he had this position, he was issuing an average of 500 visas a month, with some months being up to 1,000. So, by strict basic math alone, going by the average of 500 a month, that's 12,000 visas in 2 years. And I feel like it would be safe to say that at least 10% of the Austrian Jews emigrated out of Vienna, Austria, thanks to Ho Feng Shan. So after he ends his time as a Chinese consul, he joined the Chinese nationalist government, which fought against Japan and the Chinese War of Resistance. So when the Chinese War concluded in 1949 and the communists won, they tried to convince Ho Feng Shan to join the Communist Party, and he refused. So he continues to work as a diplomat and an ambassador for another 30 years or so. He works in Washington, D.C., Egypt, Mexico, Bolivia, and Colombia. So when he retired in 1973 at the age of 72 years old, he went to San Francisco and instead of back to China, and he was denied his pension. But he stayed strong, and even into his late 80s, he went walking every day and climbed over the sand dunes to go watch the Pacific Ocean. He helped found the Chinese Lutheran Church in San Francisco. In 1990, at the age of 89, his memoirs are published called 40 Years of My Diplomatic Life. I haven't read more than just some excerpts from it. There is an English translation that was done by his son Montoho, but I decided not to purchase it and read it because his daughter Myuu actually left a review on the Amazon page saying that it was an inadequate translation that took over 700 pages written by Dr. Ho and condensed it into about 200 and left so much out. But in these memoirs, I read that it only actually has a couple pages about his time in Vienna and the visas that he issued. Most of it is about what happened after he left Austria. He apparently barely even talked to his family about it. His daughter Myuu said she only knew what he talked about in his memoirs. On September 28th, 1997, at the age of 96 years old, Ho Feng Shan passed away peacefully in his bed. He apparently never reunited with any of the people that he saved. But that is not where Ho Feng Shan's story ends. Myuu, who was a reporter at one time, wrote his obituary and mentioned the only war story that he ever told them about when he stood up to the Gestapo when he was in the Rosenberg home. She sent it to the San Francisco Chronicle and the Boston Globe, but it was actually picked up by a lot of newspapers nationwide. And that is how we meet Eric Saul. Eric Saul, the director of the Visas for Life project, read Dr. Ho's obituary in the Sacramento Bee and was immediately intrigued. Now, Saul is a historian who dedicated most of his life and life savings into researching and telling the stories of diplomats who helped Jews during World War II. So he began the Visas for Life project in 1994 with the intention of honoring those people, but he never heard of Ho Feng Shan. So he meets with Myuu and he asks her more about her father, and she honestly doesn't know much. She tells what she knows about the incident with the Rosenbergs and how he used to imitate what the officers looked like when he did tell the story. He'd cock his hat off to the side and be all gruff about it. So Saul asked her why she thought that he acted the way he did in that moment when he was facing down death, possibly. And she responded, quote, "If you knew my father, you wouldn't have to ask. After seeing what was happening to the Jews, he felt it was natural for any human to feel compassion and want to help." So Eric Saul and his team uncovered some of the work Ho Feng Shan did. They spent years pouring through different archives, but even in those, Dr. Ho is rarely even mentioned by name. There are a lot of references that just say like the Chinese consulate in Vienna. They reached out to some survivors, like a man named Eric Goldstab, who, when they contacted him, was in his mid-70s living in Canada. Saul and Manli called him and he told his whole story. He said that he never even met Ho Feng Shan, but he is eternally grateful for him. So, Eric Goldstab was 17 years old in Vienna, Austria, during the time leading up to World War II. His father owned a successful sewing business, and they were turned down by 50 consulates until they get to Ho Feng Shan. Ho Feng Shan issues him 20 visas for Goldstab's entire extended family on July 20th, 1938, and they were able to get boat tickets to Shanghai. So they pack up all of their stuff, takes them a couple months to do so, but on November 10th, the night of Kristallnacht, when the Jews were unable to leave their homes, and Ho Feng Shan stared down the Gestapo at gunpoint in the Rosenberg's home, Eric and his father were two of the over 30,000 people who were arrested and sent off to concentration camps. But Goldstab and his father were spared because of their visas. He told Manli, "Those visas saved our life." And he actually sent his uncle's passport to Saul and Manli that had the Chinese visa issued by Ho Feng Shan. Dr. Ho was honored in 1998 in the Visas for Life Diplomats Who Saved Jews exhibit in the Yad Vashem Martyrs and Heroes Memorial Museum in Jerusalem. And through this exhibit, even more people start coming forward, attributing a large chunk of their survival to Ho Feng Shan. Like Israel Singer, who is now the Secretary General of the World Jewish Congress in New York, whose father was refused by 62 countries until he applied to the Chinese consulate. With these visas, his father and his family were allowed to leave Austria, and all the rest of their relatives were killed. And Susie Margalit, whose father was imprisoned in a concentration camp and told the only way that he would be released is if he left within 24 hours of walking out the door. And he did just that with Chinese visas. And Bernard Grossfield, who was 6 at the time. His father, Morris, was a bank officer in Vienna, and during Kristallnacht, the SS kicked down their door and ransacked their home. So his father, Morris, hid in a closet and was found and arrested and sent to a concentration camp and was there for months before they released him due to a Chinese visa. When he was released, Bernard recalled that his father was barely recognizable. So the Visas for Life exhibit begins touring Europe, and more research is done over the next few years. And the exhibit is attended by massive amounts of people, including the King and Queen of Sweden. In October of 1999, Dr. Ho is honored exclusively at an exhibit at the Vancouver Holocaust Education Center, and even more people step forward again. In January of 2000, the Visas for Life organization tells Ho Feng Shan's story to 2 Chinese journalists who write the first major article on him and all the work that he did. And on July 7th, 2000, he posthumously receives Israel's highest reward and is designated righteous among the nations. He is one of only 2 Chinese people who receive this award. The official ceremony in Jerusalem honoring him on January 23rd, 2001, and the reward is accepted by his daughter, Manli, and his son, Monto. And the medal that he received had his name on one side and the Jewish proverb, "Whoever saves one life is as though he has saved an entire world," on the other. At the ceremony, his daughter spoke and said that he would have been astonished and never would have expected any praise for his actions. And on September 10th, 2001, on what would have been his 100th birthday, the Ho family attends ceremonies in his honor in his hometown in the Hunan province. He's also honored at his college in Yali, and there's a special ceremony held in his honor at the National Library in Beijing, and the Visas for Life exhibit dedicated specifically to him opens in Beijing. So I get a little choked up here at the end because it took him dying to uncover all of this about him, and he lived his entire life knowing that because of him, thousands of Jews were saved from concentration camps. Thousands of people are alive. Whole new generations are alive today because of him. He risked his life issuing these visas. He was held at gunpoint defending his friends. He paid for a facility in Vienna so he could keep issuing these life-saving visas because it was the right thing to do. He did not want glory. He didn't want recognition. He expected nothing from it. And we can learn so much from him. I feel like today we live in a time where so much of society bleeds hatred and intolerance. So, be the Ho Feng Shan. Find your visas, sign them, and do whatever you can because it is the right thing to do. Thank you so much for listening today. If you have a story from history or mythology that you would like to hear me talk about, please reach out, especially if it's a beautiful story of someone who history has forgotten. You can email me at effeduphistory@gmail.com or reach out on any of the social medias. I'm at effeduphistory across all the platforms. And if you like the story today and want to hear more, please consider subscribing. They are not always this heavy, but this was a good one. And you walk away being a better person knowing that this man even existed. And remember, history may be watching you, so don't fuck it up. And to close today, I would like to quote Dr. Ho Feng Shan. The gifts heaven bestows are not by chance. The convictions of heroes is not lightly formed. Bye!